Welcome to Advocating for Dads with Jana Jones.
Hello and welcome to Advocating for Dads, the podcast dedicated to providing fathers with the legal guidance they need to navigate family law, custody battles, and everything in between. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and of course, we are joined by Jana K. Jones, an experienced family law attorney who has been helping fathers in North Carolina since 2009. In today's episode, we're diving deep into an important topic: how a father's involvement in his child's life impacts their development, both during and after divorce. So let's get right into it. Jana, great to see you again.
Hey, great to see you as well.
So first things first, you do like to point out you have stuff to say on this, but you're not a therapist.
Correct. That is not my training. That's not what I do.
Right. So we'll keep this to your professional opinion. So in your professional opinion, when it comes to seeing how fatherhood impacts child development, specifically a father's involvement in a child's life during and after a divorce, where do you land on how that plays out?
Yeah, so I think it's monumental, the impact that fathers make on their kids. I think that children need a balance. They need the love and the nurturing that comes from both parties, right? Because at the end of the day, when you've got kids involved, the goal is to make this as non-traumatic. That's probably not the right way to say that, but as non-traumatic as you can, right? So you want both parents involved in the child's life to the extent that they can be, and to maintain as much of what the child has become accustomed to when the parties were together as you can.
On our last episode, you mentioned one of the reasons you advocate for fathers is because the system has generally in the past always kind of skewed towards mom and towards the wife, which, as you pointed out, a lot of times is right, but not always. So in this situation, what do you see as some common misconceptions you find that people have about the father's role in the children's lives during and after divorce proceedings?
Yeah, so I think the most common misconception I see is the schedule that is best for the kids. A lot of times, the women that I am representing come in with the mindset that every other weekend is what dad should get. And a lot of times, the fathers that I represent come in and assume that every other weekend is all that they can get. And that might be the right schedule for certain families, but that's not going to be the right schedule for every family. And that's definitely not my default. My default is a joint custody arrangement, because I truly believe that the child needs both of you and to spend as much time with both of you as he or she can. So that's where I start. Again, that might not be practical for all families. It depends on where the parties live, how close each of them is to the kid's school, who's usually the one taking care of, doctor's appointments, dentist appointments, taking kids to extracurriculars, doing homework, etc., versus someone who maybe not is involved in those things because of maybe a work schedule. Maybe they work third shift, or maybe they travel for work a lot. So there can be a lot of reasons why an every other weekend schedule is the best for the parties involved and for the child. But my default is to always start with joint. And I think that's a common misconception that I try to make sure that potential clients understand out of the gate. That's where I start.
It's 2025 now. A lot of stay-at-home dads. I know a few stay-at-home dads.
Yeah.
There's obviously women in the workplace is not a weird concept in 2025 like it might have been 60 years ago or something. Why do people still have those misconceptions, do you think?
I think it's because, we're of a generation. I mean, I can only speak for myself. I'm an 80s baby. I'm 41. So I come from the time frame where every other weekend for dad would have been the norm when I was growing
I remember that as a kid, for sure. My parents are still together, but I knew friends who that was their situation. Yeah.
So I think it's just a matter of the legal profession aging, and there being judges on the bench that are my generation, there being attorneys that are my generation that are now seasoned attorneys as opposed to the newbies. So I think the mindset has shifted quite a bit, and we're really fortunate in Mecklenburg County. I think that the judges generally think the same way. They're starting from a default joint custody arrangement because they want to see a relationship fostered with both parents.
Yeah, it really is just rooted in sort of an old school society, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely an old school mindset.
Yeah, for sure. So how do the actual courts in North Carolina view the role of fathers in child development during custody hearings?
Yeah, so they view them the same as mom.
Yeah.
A parent is a parent, and it's a constitutionally protected right. And so I think, especially in Mecklenburg County, where I practice exclusively, that is where the judges start at. They assume that that's what's going to be best for the kids. And then they're listening to the facts and evidence to determine if that's not going to be practical for, this family's situation dynamics, or it's not going to be in the child's best interest for one reason or another.
And how does the legal system in North Carolina balance the best interests of the child, which of course is what everybody wants, with the rights of fathers and custody and visitation arrangements, maybe particularly when the divorce itself may be a bit contentious?
Yeah, so a judge's job when it comes to custody is best interest of child. That is their polar star. That is all they are concerned with. It is not their job to figure out what's fair to mom or dad, or mom and mom, or dad and dad. Their job is to figure out what is in the child's best interest. And sometimes that's going to mean that, a parent feels like they got what's fair. And sometimes it's going to feel like that wasn't fair to me at all. But that's not the judge's job. The judge's job is to determine what's in the child's best interest. So that is always going to be their polar star.
Even if either party, the mother or the father, have a really strong feeling like it was unfair and it's not in the best interest of the child, do they have recourse at that point?
Yeah, once you have a permanent order, you always have the ability to appeal it.
And what does that process look like?
I do not do appellate work. So if that is something that someone is interested in finding more information about, you definitely want to reach out to an attorney and ask them specifically if they do appellate work. But that is not something that I do.
That there's a specific focus on appellate work that you need to have for that situation.
Precisely. Yeah, you need to deal with an attorney who, does appellate work. That is a specific type of work, whereas I only do trial court work.
Do a lot of cases go to appeal, or is it usually be able to be kind of hashed out, if you will, in the divorce process?
So usually, I can't think of too many cases that I've had that got appealed, or anybody appealed. I would say that it really depends on your resources. Appellate work is a lot more expensive generally than trial work is. Additionally, if the facts and circumstances warrant it, you can file for something called a modification of child custody, but there has to be a substantial change in circumstances since the entry of that original order.
Since the judge originally, yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, so a lot of times, if you're not particularly happy with the order, maybe let some time pass. If something major happens, that's going to give you a basis for that substantial change. So then you can change the order without it being an appellate situation. But outside of that, if you don't have a substantial change, you're just simply unhappy with the judge's ruling, then your only recourse is to do appeals.
If mom's pushing hard for more custody, what strategies can fathers use to demonstrate their involvement and commitment to their child's development in family court?
So be involved and be knowledgeable. A lot of times what happens in a traditional mom and dad situation, mom is the one who is making doctor's appointments, following up with teachers, things of that nature, and, giving that information to dad when he gets home, maybe from work or whatnot. And that is just the dynamic of how the family goes. I know that's the dynamic in my house for the most part, right? That's not unusual. Mm-hmm. But I think what a lot of times happens is when the parties separate, the dad still is operating under that previous way the parties communicated and he got information, and that's done. It's not her responsibility anymore. You're not a family unit to be like, hey, this dentist appointment's coming up. The teacher said so-and-so, et cetera. Now, dad, you are going to have to proactively go out and get that information yourself. You need to be on, the MyChart account. You need to be in the Power School account. You need to be able to go get that information for yourself and not be dependent on her to give you that information. Now, in an ideal scenario, if people are amicable, you will still communicate. You'll still share that information, but you can't depend on it anymore because you're no longer that family unit.
Yeah, I think about my marriage and our son, and we're very 50-50. We both are very involved in everything, but I definitely understand that that's not always the case. And I can also think about the idea that if a father doesn't have primary custody or joint custody, that they might feel like they're not playing a significant role in the child's life. I could definitely feel like I would feel that way. What do you generally kind of tell fathers and how they can still play a significant role even when they don't have primary or joint custody?
Work with whatever you've got. If you end up with an order that gives you every other weekend, then make those weekends a blast. Do all the fun stuff. For all practical purposes, that's exactly what you can do. You get a weekend to yourself, and then you get a weekend with your kids.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's a win-win. So you just take whatever time that you do have and maximize it. Do all the fun things. Take them to Carowinds. Take them to the movies. You're not having to necessarily go to doctor's appointment or extracurriculars or do homework. So do all the fun things.
Be the fun guy.
Yeah, be the fun guy.
Yeah.
Be the fun guy. Make the best of it.
Yeah. I love my kid, but having a weekend off every once in a while would not be. I don't want to get divorced. I'm not saying I do, but I could use that time. That's for sure. We all can.
Absolutely.
So for any fathers, who might be listening, what advice would you have if they fear that their role as a parent might be undermined during divorce proceedings? And can you talk about why hiring a firm like yours early is imperative?
Yeah, hiring a firm like mine is imperative to do early. What happens is, like we've mentioned in previous podcasts and before today, best interest of the child is where the court lands when it comes to determining what a custody schedule is going to look like, not what's fair to parties, right? So because of that, if you're in a situation where you've separated and you've gone 6 months, 9 months, and you've been bullied into an every other weekend schedule, maybe you have the capacity and you want a joint custody schedule, but the other parent just won't let it happen, right? They're threatening calling the cops. They are badgering or belittling or, demanding that you return the child or children at a certain time or something along those lines. And so you feel like you've been pigeonholed or bullying into this schedule, and it goes on for some period of time before you get the courts involved. Now, when you start a case, you're starting from that default position, not the joint custody, the default position that you've been in, because that is what the children have become accustomed to, for better or worse. If they're used to seeing you every other weekend, and that's how it's been for the past 6 or 9 months, you have an uphill battle to prove to the court that it is in the child's best interest to now switch things up again. They've already dealt with the fact that parents are splitting up and this is the new normal, and they've gotten maybe accustomed to that new normal. And now we're trying to say, we want a different new normal, right? And again, it is the judge's job to figure out best interest, not what's fair. So the sooner you get in and get legal advice and get started pushing back on that schedule and getting the time you deserve, the better.
Does the child's desires have any input in the judge's decision?
So that depends on your judge. That depends on the age of the child. There's a lot that goes into that. But generally speaking, if you've got a child that's, I would say maybe 12-ish or older and is able to articulate how they feel, judges are usually willing to talk to those children in chambers, ideally. What I hate to see happening and what I hate to have happen is to put children on the stand no matter what their age is. At a certain age, there's no capacity, right? The judge doesn't feel like they're mature enough to be on the stand anyway.
Yeah, that's a nerve-wracking experience too for anyone, much less a 13-year-old.
Right, exactly. So at a certain age, they're just not going to even consider speaking to them or putting them on the stand. But I would say once they get to the age of around 12 or 13, the courts will consider speaking to them. And obviously older children, they would definitely speak to. But there are some judges that refuse to speak to kids in chambers and say, no, you're going to have to call them to the stand. And that's a really tough position to put a child in because they're up there talking, negatively about one of their parents in open court. And it's not a pretty situation. So ideally, if we're going to get the child's opinion involved, we're going to have the child speak to the judge in chambers so that that's a private conversation.
And hopefully if it is talking to the child, that it's about how they want to be part of both parents' lives, not this person isn't great and this person is great. You're not pitting them against either parent. It's them pushing for equal custody, ideally.
Ideally, yes.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us on Advocating for Dads with experienced family law attorney Jana K. Jones. To connect with Jana, head to lawofficeofjkj.com and please like and subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. Jana, as always, thanks so much for being here. It was great talking to you.
Thanks. Great speaking with you as well.
Thanks for watching. If you like this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more amazing videos like this one.